you're doing well?
Good morning or good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I think we're very happy because we have a great panel. But first of all, we have a great, someone who's great, Ovais Sarmad. Thank you so much for being here. I'm starting with you because I know you have a very busy schedule, and so you need to leave quite soon. So we wanted to sort of hear from you what are the latest trends, where are we at when it comes to climate finance and all the negotiations going on. The world is watching, so we cannot wait to hear more from you. And then I know you'll have to leave a bit earlier than the other panelists, but please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon. And it's a great pleasure. Very good to see some friends here. Brune and Bertrand, other panel members here, and all of you. First of all, I'd like to thank you most sincerely, bottom of my heart, for coming to this COP. It's not a usual COP. It's not a normal situation, circumstances in which we are operating here. So thank you very much for your engagement. That means a lot, and we need to do everything we can, and all your support is necessary to make this COP a success and get to a successful outcome. Now, in terms of what's happening, it's unprecedented in every way, but there is some good news coming out. For the first 2 days, you've heard from the world leaders. They have made some very important, very meaningful commitments all across the board, from resilience to adaptation to mitigations to mitigation to finance, and some very innovative solutions that have come out. But there is still a lot more to be done, and that's where friends and colleagues like Bertrand come into play with their innovative impetus to bring solutions that are scalable. And you've already exceeded your own very ambitious target of identifying 1,000 companies, successful companies who could provide solutions at scale, but you even surpassed that. So congratulations for that. And one of those solutions, one of those innovative solutions is actually an innovation hub that we created in our organization in UNFCCC Secretariat, that's just sitting right below this Pavilion. So I welcome all of you to go there. And this is it's become an incubator where innovators, and aspiring individuals, companies around the world can showcase what they're doing in terms of transformative action. Because we are no longer in incremental solutions. We really need to transform. So I think this COP, I personally believe, is that turning point. And I strongly feel that I think we are at the cusp of history where we will turn the corner. And again, very much like to hear you and to know what you are doing and how we can work together. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Executive Secretary of the UNFCCC. It's great to hear your views. You talked a lot about innovation and how to create a hub. That's what you're aiming at doing. Creating a hub for new technologies, for innovation. And so the whole point, and our discussion is really going to be about how do we finance that? How do we scale up solutions? How do we identify the right solutions? So we have a great panel here, and perhaps I'll let you introduce yourselves so that everybody knows exactly who's around the table. But we have a great innovator. We actually have a great company that has been leading on that topic for many years. We have, again, Antoine Sire from BNP Paribas, who's been working hard on finding new ways and innovative ways of financing the transition. And we have as well another also leading voice in that space. So the question now is, so we've had, there was almost a lot of controversies and difficult discussions ahead of the COP around financing and around scaling up and speeding action. So we know that now the parties have committed to an annual 100 billion by 2023, but a lot of people say, well, this is too late, this is not soon enough. How do we scale that up? And so the question really is, how can we increase the amount that flows? And even if it's difficult to identify really what climate finance means, how can we increase the amount, and how can we identify the right technologies and actually scale them up. And so we have not only someone who's basically managed to come up with a repertoire and a huge amount of green technologies, but we also have, as I said, private companies who've been working in that field for many years trying to make breakthroughs. So really, it would be great to have your views, Bertrand, on how. So you've been talking about how actually green technologies can be really profitable, how tomorrow's businesses are going to be green or will not be. But can you tell us a bit, how come then that all the businesses haven't become, green, and how come that there is a lot of expectation and even impatience when it comes to scaling up?
If I may, just before that, one quick update to what you just said. You're absolutely right. The 100 billion target has been announced that it will be met in 2023, but van der Leyen, the European Commission President, at this COP said they will try, European Union will try to do that by next year. So there is hope, there is a lot more hope there.
Absolutely.
Good news. Since years, we are hearing that the climate transition is a very expensive cost. And I want to prove that it's a very profitable investment. And we have to change the narrative. Because a cost is when you spend money that is lost. An investment is when you spend money in order to recover more money than what you spend. So I think the first thing is that people have to understand the language and the definition of cost and investment. And then we have to prove that it is true. We have to prove that it's a profitable investment and not an expensive cost. And this is why at COP22 in Marrakesh, 5 years ago, I committed the Solar Impulse Foundation to identify 1,000 proofs of what I'm saying. 1,000 technical solutions that would be financially profitable to protect the environment. Unfortunately, when I announced that, a lot of people told me it was impossible. And I love that because it makes a huge stimulation and incentive inside the team. You have great creative people in the team who want to prove that it's possible. And this year in April, we reached our target of 1,000 solutions. And now we are at 1,300 solutions. And 2 more solutions every day are arriving. And these solutions are systems, products, materials, sources of energy, devices that create jobs and allow the industry to make profit while being ecological in the field of water, energy, construction, mobility, industry, and agriculture. So we have made our job now. We have proven that it works. But the next challenge is to implement them, to bring them to the market, because they are credible, they exist today. It's not a vague idea for the future. It is something that exists. All of them have been labeled by external experts. So we need to have these solutions been developed, being implemented on the market, being funded, and this is where comes the world of finance. I tell you, the world of finance is really interested by these solutions because it's new business opportunities. If the finance has to withdraw from fossil energy, they need new investment opportunities. And basically, we are offering exactly that to all the people who want to participate.
Well, that's thank you so much, Bertrand. It's really it's great to hear your views. It's also great to hear about your narrative and how you're not only changing the way we talk about sustainable development, but also putting on the table, if I can put it this way, concrete solutions. Now, we have the concrete solutions. We are, in the right sort of direction to get the 100 billion, at least on an annual basis. But we know it's a drop in the ocean. We know that unless we have banks such as BNP Paribas, who's been leading in terms of green finance and climate finance, if we don't have partners like you, we won't make the transition and we won't succeed. So how do you address that? How do you identify the right solutions? How do you make choices? How do you help scale up? How do you have a concrete impact? That is the question that now you're trying to solve, actually, Antoine.
Thank you, and of course, for us it's a matter of life and death, because a bank that will finance the technologies of yesterday in such an urgent situation, we know currently, people will come very soon and tell this bank, you are not the kind of bank we need in the 21st century. So it's really a question for us. It's a question of life and death. It's clear, but we saw this a few years ago, and we started to do the transformation. And the transformation, of course, we also have to change what we can call the old world, because you will not erase in one day the companies of the old world. So it's very important, and I have a very good example here of a company which is doing a huge transformation, and that's why, for example, we have created a low carbon transition group with 250 people fully dedicated to help the large companies to accelerate their transition and finance this acceleration. But the technologies, a lot of technologies, will come from the startups, and this is why a few years ago we created a unit with quite important means dedicated to identify startups of the green techs, and which has already a certain track record. But if you want to accelerate, you need to do coalitions with people who are not necessarily in the finance and who have been able to take the problem by the technology side and accelerate sourcing of technologies. And the partnership with Bertrand's foundation is absolutely fantastic for this, because he has built the best reserve of startups with new technologies you can imagine in the world. And we are combining our expertise in identifying the startups with the best profitability and usability for a green tech and a green planet combination. So we have really developed a skill in this to combine financial efficiency and environment efficiency, and also to accompany the CEOs and the leaders of those companies, because from the technology to the business success there is a margin, and our job as a bank is to help the business, I would say the creators to become successful business people. But on the other hand, the credibility in terms of environment and the capacity to identify the solution, nobody can provide this better than Bertrand. And this is why we created together an investment fund, which is a 150 million investment fund, because for the beginning it will come to companies that are relatively early stage. The technology is existing. It has been labeled by Bertrand's organization, but they now need about 5 years or maybe a bit less to become profitable. We will invest money in them to be able to go to the next step and to become profitable before the next 5 years. And for, I would say, the V1 of this fund, BNP Paribas will invest 75 million euros in the fund, and we are looking for external investors that will provide another 75 million euros, because I believe it's really important that we develop a model where we are able to put our own money because we believe in it, and we want our P&L to benefit from the success of those companies. But we are a bank, we serve the other businesses, and we want our trusted clients and partners to also benefit from those investments that can be, I really believe, a fantastic investment for the future. The first purpose is to make them fantastic investment for the planet, but we believe it's really possible to combine this with profitability.
It's great, Antoine. It's great to hear that. As I said again, especially when there's a lot of talk around public finance, and I know, Mr. Deputy Executive Secretary, I know you have to leave soon. But when you hear that, are you hopeful that more banks are actually going to commit to sort of coming out and divesting from fossil fuel companies? How willing? Did you manage to get a sense of how willing they were to actually explore uncharted territories, just like Antoine and Bertrand are doing?
I think, yes, definitely true. I think listening to Antoine is very inspiring, because I also believe that there are many companies and big corporations who are out there in many sectors. They know this. They have seen the writing on the wall, and they have seen the Kodaks of the world who have gone out of business, and the clients and the customers, they know what is happening to the environment, and they are becoming much more demanding to the corporations, and especially corporations such as banks and investment companies, to see where they are investing and whether they are investing in a sustainable and in a responsible manner. If not, they will be looking at other sources, other corporations to move away from. So that is happening, and as I said, the writing is on the wall.
And if you need any support in the discussions between countries and negotiators and parties, we're here to help. Because some countries have not understood the profitability of these solutions. So maybe we can be a help in showing them the advantage of this climate transition in terms of economy. And we have the proofs of that. So don't hesitate to call us.
Bertrand is also a diplomat. He has many hats. He's an inventor, a politician, a businessman. So
and I know a lot of governments listen to him.
Yes, yeah. Clearly, I was in that position, so I can confirm. Magali, it's very nice to have you. We've been talking a lot about actually how do we finance the transition? How do we finance green companies? Some of them are like green by essence. Others, such as yours, are huge. They're transforming. They have a huge impact on the environment, but also a huge impact on society, because we still need you. So how do we make that transition? How did you manage to access, and are you able to access finance to actually fund your transition through potentially also carbon disclosure mechanisms? Or can you tell us more about that? Because it's really fascinating to have your views.
Thank you, Brune. So yes, of course, as you said, we have a huge societal challenge in front of us. I just put two numbers, which is, 1.2 billion people today don't have a proper roof on their head. And 2.5 billion people will move to urban area in the next 30 years, which is equivalent to building New York City every month. I just want to put those numbers to explain why you need concrete, and I like how you have been talking about concrete measures. We need concrete, but we need a green concrete, and we need it today. So to start with, we are very proud that 19 of our solutions have been labeled by the Solar Impulse Foundation, which means that today we have at least 19 products that we sell on the market, which are good for the planet, good for the people, and good for us as a business. And I will just name one, which is called Pact, and it's the biggest green range of concrete. It's in 24 markets. We launched it 1 year ago. Today, there are some countries where the month-on-month growth is like 50%, and one of them is India. So it's all over. There's a huge demand, and we have a price premium on it. So it's good for us. And it's not necessarily more expensive to make, because the cost is not necessarily a problem. So we have today a lot of low-hanging fruits where we can both be beneficiary on the business and on the planet, which we can implement right now. And I think companies are starting to realize it. Nobody wants to be the next Kodak. We all want to be the next Tesla. And so we are all transforming it. But you're right, that's a low-hanging fruit. That's not going to take us to zero. What will take us to zero is new technologies that today don't necessarily exist. So in our case, we don't need new technology until 2030, so we can really accelerate the next 10 years. But in parallel, we also need to develop innovative solution. And in my case, I am actually Chief Sustainability and Innovation Officer. That's why I have both under me to create that emulation. It's fantastic to see what comes out of our R&D, but this is where money will start becoming a problem. When we talk about carbon capture, utilization, and storage, infrastructure that is needed will become, at some stage, a problem. Not today, but in the future years. But also, in countries where, regions where there is a CO2 pricing, all our investment that we do has a much better return. So it allows us to accelerate much more. So there's many mechanisms, such as CO2 pricing, such as developing infrastructure around CCUS, etc., where finance will be important. And just one thing I would like to say about finance is today our investors are pushing us, and that's excellent. So my best friend in Holcim is actually the CFO. I sometimes think she wants my job because she speaks so well about sustainability. But it's important because if we were not aligned together, we couldn't make it. If she was giving objectives to the operation, which would be contradicting to mine, we couldn't make it. So last year we issued, I think it was the first in our sector, a sustainability-linked bond, where we basically said if we don't reach our 2030 target, it's going to cost us a few millions. And you can only do that if you have a great partnership between finance and sustainability. But it also proved that we are not just promising things. We are actually putting our money, our own money on the table to show how serious we are about it.
That's a very good example. I just wanted to, I'm sure you have experienced it in your government. The Minister of Finance need to be friends with Minister of Environment and vice versa.
Yes, I think there should be only one, but that's a bit of a controversial, but you're absolutely right. I know you have to leave. We were very happy and very lucky to have you. Best of luck for the rest of the negotiations, and you can count on our support. Great. Diane, so you're in charge of food and nature program for the WBCSD. You have a great experience in, so the WBCSD is the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. Just so you know, you have a great experience working with the private sector. You are focusing on perhaps what is the key issue that we need to solve sort of tomorrow, which is agriculture, food, nature. How do we make sure that it actually keeps capturing carbon? But you can speak better than me about that. Again here, how do we channel money, but not only money, but the right amount of money, not only public money, but also private money? What are the mechanisms that we can put in place? What are the solutions? Can you tell us a bit more about that? We need, again, that's a critical area that we need to focus on.
Yeah, thank you so much. It absolutely is. And one of the things that I think has been really exciting about this COP is that even though we've only had a few days under our belt, the level of actionable commitment has been remarkable, not only in what is going to help drive us towards 1.5, but also in what is going to drive finance. And this is the first COP where that is coming through so significantly. I'm really so happy to see that the finance conversation has expanded into understanding the role that land use change plays in mission. A must-do, absolutely critical. What we haven't yet embraced is the role that agriculture plays also in assuring that we can deliver not just the ambition of the climate COP, but also the ambition of getting to nature positive and this incredibly important role of equity, which we're also still not quite talking about quite enough when we get into these conversations. But these intricate challenges of climate action, nature action, and taking action in equity and livelihoods really comes together in agriculture as well. So we can really bring very powerful solutions to bear that address this nature-climate intersection agenda and bring not just much more significant risk management, but huge opportunities, Bertrand, like you were saying. Just to build, Magali, on what you were touching on, in this COVID response time frame, investors and stakeholders, shareholders, really woke up to the fact that companies who are managing their non-financial performance as closely as they're managing their financial performance performed better and are more stable in the face of these really big disruptions. That holds true across every sector. We saw that especially in the food and agricultural sector, where early days concerns around food security were actually able to be incredibly well managed across the sector globally. But it highlighted this intersection of global value chains, heavy dependence on just a few crops, and where we need to actually be able to move the dial on really bringing more companies into the conversation of transformation. That intersected this year with the UN's first ever Food Systems Summit, which is as much about getting ministries to talk to each other as it is about getting UN agencies to talk to each other, just sort of equally challenging. But we created from that a much more common narrative around what needs to take place across ministries and across UN agencies, but also the role of business. So we had the very privileged role of helping mobilize private sector engagement to and through the UN Food Systems Summit, which was elevating a lot of the topics that are coming into this COP as well, because one of those key areas was on nature positive production that acts on climate change. Those are the types of solutions that need finance mechanisms to enable them, but they need the finance mechanisms that can take it all the way back to the farm, which is a very complex value chain to get back into. We've had these conversations. So we started to create a couple of coalitions, multi-stakeholder coalitions, which is what we've been speaking to in each of these cases. That's how change happens. We've seen ambitious commitments around the types of food transformative investment partnerships that are necessary, that creates partnerships between banks like BNP and Rabobank, UNEP-FI, WBCSD's expanded members, to say, here's what we need to have for KPIs, here's what we need to have for data and metrics, and here's what a good investment is going to look like, and here's where we're going to move that money, and here's how we're going to make sure it delivers practice change on the ground so that we know that we're actually achieving that system transformation all the way back through the system. There's a lot of examples to that we can get into, but it's really through companies like Holcim and banks like BNP that are helping show what's actually possible, helping to shift this and pulling the money through that enables it. The money is there, we just need more of these types of examples. And I know we'll get into more of those examples as we go.
No, absolutely. I think you really touched on the right issue. I mean, how do we make it tangible and concrete? And I've had discussions. I mean, I've been to several COPs before, and as you said, I mean, there was talks around finance. We were mostly focused on the 100 billion. And some banks were like sort of thinking ahead, but a lot of them didn't really feel that it was their business. And so I think this has been changing over the past 18 months, I would say rather dramatically. Would you say that this is what you've experienced as well? And do you see coming out of COVID an accelerating trend, but that also can translate into very concrete action? I think you're seeing that, as you said, in your field, Magali, as well, in your industry. But you now, Bertrand and Antoine, given that you have sort of your work and your experience spans across different sectors of the economy, do you also see that? And how, perhaps first question, do you see that? And second, what can we do to scale it up even faster?
In every new situation, there are pioneers who understand the situation, take advantage of it, go embrace the unknown, change the patterns of thinking, invent new ways of doing, and you have the others. And it was like this during the Industrial Revolution 200 years ago. You had the people who thought we're still going on horses, while the others were going on the steam machine. And now that the steam machine is working everywhere, nobody wanted to go to oil because coal was fine. Then they went to oil. And now we see that oil is not working well anymore. So you have the first pioneers who transit to renewables, and the others, like usual, are resisting. So how can we, it's not a question of scaling up, it's a question of pushing everybody to be as good as the pioneers, to be as innovative as the pioneers, to embrace the unknown as well as the pioneers. And here, I think the states have a huge role, because the finance will follow, the industry will follow, the population wants a change. But if the regulation remain completely outdated, nothing will change. We have to understand that the regulations today are linked to the technologies that are 50 years old or 100 years old. So it is still allowed to put as much CO2 as we want in the atmosphere, as much plastic in the oceans, as much chemicals in the soil as we want. And this has to change. So if the technology allows to be clean, the regulation should oblige the people to use the technologies that can make them clean. And the standards and the norms in terms of emission has to push toward energy efficiency, clean technologies, renewable sources of energy, circular economy, and so on. And just one example, and we were talking about it, Brune, when we were at the Tech for Good in front of a representative, very high representative of a GAFA, and we were saying we need to ban programmed obsolescence. And the best way to do it is to oblige a guarantee of 5 years on everything. And she became white, green, yellow, you know, and she said, I can never tell that to my CEO. But this is exactly what we need. This is what will reduce the waste and make people more efficient.
So well, I agree with you, Bertrand, but at the same time, it's a bit the chicken and egg situation. At the same time, and if I take my previous hats, what sometimes you worry about the consequences it will have on jobs and on, like, you know, on the concrete lives of people. So how, and you're talking about the pioneers and how everybody should become and just become like the pioneers. The question really is, this is we are still, I think, the mindset is still very much based on competition. So how do you encourage, how do you make sure that instead of competition we have more collaboration? This morning, for example, in the tourism industry, we tried to bring the industry closer together to achieve more and bring forces together. You, Diane, you mentioned that, and I know, but if you could tell us a bit more. I know, for example, Antoine, I know you've been as well, or can you tell us a bit more about that, and then as well Bertrand and Magali, because I think really it's about how do we go for competition, do we go for collaboration, how, you know, how do we do that?
I believe that we are going mainly to a form of competition based on collaboration. Because, for example, as a now, you know, the competition between banks has really started maybe in 2021. It's accelerating. It's now you have the American banks that have understood that things are really changing. So when Americans start to change, they are able to change very fast. So the competition is really starting. And for example, we are really now assessing all our clients under very stringent zero carbon and greening criteria. We are taking all the sectors. We are comparing sector by sector, where all the companies are compared to their ideal path to go to net zero. And if they are not in the net zero path, we will ask them what is their plan to enter into the net zero plan. And if they have no plan, they will have no money. So it's as clear as this, and and this is being decided, and this is becoming a common standard by the banks. And we will not go all the banks and asking different questions to our clients. It's not possible, because at the end the clients get mad and it doesn't work. So if we want this to work, we have to ask coherent criteria between all, and that's why the alliances such as the Net Zero Banking Alliance that was created under the auspices of UNEP FI, and we are very proud at BNP Paribas because we were among the 40 first banks in the world to be member of this alliance, and I believe we were probably the largest that was a member in the first group of banks. And now there are 140 banks with all the large banks in the world, and we have guides. We have group of banks that are now, and we are part of it also, who are creating practitioners' guide to say that net zero has to be science-based. It has to be the kind of alignment model we need to have. So standards are being created, and of course, with the Net Zero Banking Alliance, we are committed to give very precise objectives and to follow them and to report. So we are entering into a new world.
And I think this can be turned into regulations, because sometimes I think in the public sector or sometimes government it is difficult to take that step, and you don't want to be regulating too early, but at the same time you don't want to be waiting for too long. So I think that types of collaboration and coalitions are absolutely critical. This is what the WBCSD has been doing for years. But Magali, you wanted to jump in.
Yeah, I wanted to jump in because I think competition is healthy, of course, but the sector has to move. Holcim is not going to build that monthly New York City by itself. So it's not going to help the planet if we do something and the others don't do. So the sector has to move. In our case, we have an association called GCCA, Global Cement and Concrete Association, which represent 80% of the cement volume outside China. So the membership, I mean. And I was co-chairing the work of our 2050 Go to Zero, and we issued our roadmap last month. We were the first industry who, as an industry, collectively, all the CEOs of all those companies have committed to have net zero concrete by 2050. And I think it's a major step. And we also have a part of GCCA called Innovendi, where we innovate together. And we innovate looking at startups. You were mentioning startups earlier. Looking at startups that would be good for the sector. And I think I'm very proud of this work, not because I co-chair it. Well, I'm also very proud to have co-chaired it. But
yes,
I'm very proud of this work because it's an industry, represents 7% of the CO2 emitted. The entire industry has to move. So it's no more time for this fight amongst us of who takes the lead, who is the best. No, you want to take the lead because you want people to, you want to impulse, give an impulsion, to give a momentum. But ultimately, what you really want is the sector to move.
Absolutely. I think that's plus if we see that and the sustainability linked bond that you've put in place, I think all the right sort of bricks are ready to basically have almost reach a tipping point, and which is what the technologies you're promoting are also helping. So we're talking a lot about collaboration, how it helps scaling up, how the mindsets have changed, how now private money is increasingly willing to be flowing towards low carbon projects. But you, Diane, what do you think is the specific role of the WBCSD? How can we actually make that perhaps faster, or could you tell us ways of collaborating that are even more, I would say, cutting edge or perhaps across sectors? I mean, you've touched on that, and it would be great to hear more from you.
Yeah, sure. Happy to talk more about that. This is the only way I think that we're going to accelerate. What we've been talking about here, Magali, the examples you were just sharing, this is around setting the bar of ambition, showing what's possible and bringing others along faster, because you've created consistent roadmap guidance for what other companies who may not have the resources like WBCSD members do to be able to understand what action is needed and what changes they need to make. So this coming together as business leaders to set the frameworks, the roadmaps, the methodologies, the tools, the KPIs, which is a lot of the work, of course, that WBCSD leads in partnership with others by key sectors, is what enables acceleration and at the same time raises that level of ambition. Let me give you two examples. Because you asked me to talk on agriculture, I'll go back to the Food Systems Summit for a moment, but then I'm going to bring it to life here in this COP as well. One of the things that we did coming into the Food Systems Summit was set that bar of ambition for private sector. We actually created a declaration of ambition. It sits on the Food Systems Summit UN website that over 200 CEOs from around the world, large to small companies, signed on to, that was extremely ambitious. And it laid out what their companies, material to their value chains, would commit to and take action on. And it included finance, it included production, it included resilience, it included healthy diets, all of these transformation levers that are required. So moving a food system is bigger than just taking climate action. It was embedded within that. But then as you think about what it takes to really accelerate business leadership coming into a climate COP and how that engages with stakeholders, yesterday WBCSD launched our Climate Manifesto, which BNP and Holcim are very proud signatories to. This sets out 12 critical pathways that business will lead on that are levers to transform climate action. It includes action on nature-based solutions. It includes action on stopping coal. It includes action on solving for methane. It includes action on carbon storage and capture. But it also includes a corporate, a CDC. You know, instead of having just national commitments that are tracked, how do we get to this for corporations as well, so that we can demonstrate all of this effort that business is leading in that can be a determined contribution to what governments are signing up to as well. And this is frankly key, because when we look at what business leaders can provide, we can also provide ambition to governments. We can prove what's possible and give them the courage to come with us and move faster. The other thing that businesses do is we take that through our value chains, right? So everything that we do with our suppliers, all the way down to whatever industry sector we're in, we pull that along with us and accelerate that. And then, as both Magali and Antoine have spoken to, and frankly with the work Bertrand is doing in setting out the future technologies, we're also setting out, here's what you need to do if you want to keep up, and here's what success in the marketplace continues to look like. And that's what gets very exciting, and that's where collaboration drives us faster and back into that healthy competition then. So just a few examples. There's so many more, but I'll stop with those.
No, that's great. Again, it's fascinating. Now but somehow we're talking about. I mean, these are great examples. But how do we tackle the issue of actually the first mover disadvantage? Because at the end of the day, you know, sometimes, and there's, so I think we're facing a situation where on the one hand, we almost have a bubble. I mean, it's like super exciting and there's a lot of money willing to flow, because we know there's a lot of money around, sort of willing to flow perhaps to a lot of like early stage companies and so first, how do we avoid that's like creating a bubble, and how do we avoid as well greenwashing, because that's also, you know, one of the issues, and how can we truly help and make sure that we identify the right technologies, and that actually sort of being the first mover in that space does not become a handicap in the future. And I think this is really the trouble in a way with innovation, and how can money help sort of de-risk that? And what are the platforms, what are the types of collaboration, how can we address that issue? Because we know that it can be extremely costly to just like not invest or not identify the technology that could have been a game changer.
I believe that to de-risk the investment, we need a very good predictability of the regulation. And we co-signed last year 2 tribunes, 2 op-eds, with the CEOs of our partner companies, really big companies. And what were they asking, together with the Solar Impulse Foundation, to the heads of state? They were asking for more ambitious ecological regulation. Can you imagine that? Big corporations asking for more regulation. And why? Because it will avoid the distortion of competitivity. And one of these regulation, of course, is carbon tax. Putting a price on carbon, because this puts everybody on a fair level. Now we have to think about one point that you were mentioning in your previous question, is the jobs. We should not lose jobs. And this is where I really want to come with this notion of qualitative growth. Because what is the problem of our economy today? It's the problem of selling more and more at a price that is lower and lower making more and more waste and pollution and emissions and extraction of natural resources. So it's always doing more, and it puts us in a dead end. But also in terms of economy, because the margin is so small that when we see a crisis like the COVID, it puts the economy down because nobody has the reserves to be able to deal with no business for a couple of months. What is qualitative growth? Qualitative growth is when you create more jobs and you make more profits by becoming more efficient. What does it mean? It means that when you become more efficient, you need less resources, you need less energy, but you earn money with the saving that you are doing on energy and resource. And this allows the consumer to buy less because he will not need to buy more. He can buy less devices, electronic devices, for example, if there is no artificial obsolescence. He will buy better quality, which means that over time, he will save money. He will save money, which means that he can buy everything a little bit more expensive in order to give more margin to the corporation who is selling less. So if you need to change, for example, the computer, you know, the waste in electronic is a tremendous problem. So instead of changing your computer every 2 years, you change it every 5 years, you save a lot of money that allows you to pay for your computer a bit more expensive, giving more margin to the company who will sell less. So each one earns something. The people who sell less earn more money, more profit, less revenue, but more profit. And the people who are sometimes poor people are going to spend less money to get something of better quality. It's another mindset in the economy, but I tell you, it works.
It's a bit like cross-subsidies, basically, just like public utilities have been doing in the past. I think it's a great example of collaboration, and I wanted us to sort of slowly come to that. And Antoine, I'll leave you the floor. But I guess one of the questions that we're being asked is really, I don't know whether you're familiar with Nassim Taleb, the American author who actually wrote about the black swan, and how we need to we need to become anti-fragile. So actually making sure that the shocks into the system makes us stronger, better, helps us to innovate, and just like you said, Bertrand, be able to go through one crisis to the other without just collapsing. And so I guess it's part of the questions that we asked to address here. But Antoine, you wanted also to jump and because you're the one putting money on the table.
No,
at the end of the day.
yes. So just two remarks. First of all, to concur with a very concrete example to what Bertrand was saying for the regulation. There is one case where the regulation is now predictable, is the automotive industries, because all the cities are banning the thermic cars from their downtown, and it starts with the big cities, but it will go to smaller cities, and at one moment everybody has understood that it will go to each cities. And you can see as BNP Paribas now we barely do any financing to the automotive industry, which is not intended to change their factories of old cars to factories of electric, of hybrid cars. If you see all the syndicated loans, all the green bonds, all the facilities we have structured over the last 2 years, it's about transforming an automotive factory or an automotive group of production units into cars of the future production. So it's obvious, and in this case it works. The other thing is that we have to learn to change short-termism to a more mid-termism and long-termism. which is relatively easy for a bank, much easier than people believe, because bank we do loans, and when we do loans on several years, we need the people to be there in 10 years, 5 or 10 years of time to repay their loans. So and this is important. And I give you an example. A few years ago, in 2017, we completely stopped to finance the specialist of fracking, of shale oil, and of tar sands. And this decision was absolutely unique in the market at that time. And honestly, we took it in the beginning purely for ecological decisions, the reasons, because we had clearly identified that this was the dirtiest source of energy, the dirtiest for the soil, the dirtiest because it consumes energy during its transportation also. So and also because the specialists of this industry are not intending to transition. They are just here to do this, and when so it's really the dirtiest. But what we discovered very soon is that having a monoliner in one energy in a period with the current energy transition and the current volatility of the different cost of energy is a complete nonsense in terms of economy. And this we discovered, it took 2 or 3 years to discover, and now we are probably the only large bank to have €0 and $0 in its book on unconventional oil specialist, and we avoided losses that all our competitors did endure. And we did this because we were able to have not very, very long term, because Keynes says, okay, that it's difficult for the economy, but at least we had a vision on several years, on 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, and it's important for companies to have this vision in current situation.
And I think, yeah, and building, you know, how Antoine, you've said that you've been moving out of some sectors. So when it comes to shale gas, you know, it's fine. Not that many people were working in that industry, but if you take the automotive industry, for example, it has a huge impact on jobs. So you touched on that, Bertrand. But even going beyond the whole issue of jobs, I think social issues, and this is what struck me in our discussion here. We've been talking about the environment, but we've been sort of forgetting that there are, you know, real people behind it. And so how do we factor that in? How do we, you know, my fear is that by going as fast and by not allowing the right transition, and I know it's not very trendy to say that, right? We all want to like have change happen, you know, overnight. But by allowing the transition, you're also preparing for and making sure that you're leaving no one behind. I guess that's the job of you know, governments. But wow, I think really private companies have a role to play in that, an increasingly important role to play. And so I know it's been at the heart of, you know, your work at the WBCSD. Diane, can you tell us, like, how do you view that issue? Do you think that private companies are actually addressing the issue? When you talk about agriculture, food, nature, it's at the heart of everything, right?
So I think if we think about the curve of understanding and awareness for business action needs to take place, climate is certainly at the top. Companies are starting to understand what it means to take action to support nature and be more nature positive and not just extend beyond our planetary boundaries. This area of equity is by far the most challenging at this stage, but we're seeing, because of the pressure on these social justice issues and inequity rising, that's leapfrogging these other challenges. I want to call out something that the UK government did 2 years ago at the COP, is they launched the just rural transition. And this is the whole belief behind making sure that as we transition these sectoral pathways towards net zero, that the investments are actually going to enable the people who need to shift are supported through that. We're actually the host of the investment partnership of that just rural transition, which is geared very much at this stage towards the transition in agriculture, where it's not just around mitigation through practice changes, it's also a huge area of opportunity for resilience and adaptation, and we think this is going to be picked up as we head into Egypt even more next year. This challenge around ensuring just transitions, building into the process resilience and adaptation, is what really embeds the opportunity. So it is very much about jobs. It's very much around reskilling, understanding which jobs are moving where, but it's equally understanding what are these impacts and how do entire communities need to shift and move? How do we encompass and embrace youth in this movement? How do we shift and engage women through this process? All of these pieces are starting to be better understood, but are not yet fundable because we don't have the right KPIs.
So that
and
was my
these
question.
metrics are gotta be built. Yeah, and we've gotta accelerate how we get to standard KPIs around what good equity looks like so that we can be making these shifts through investments in ways that are data-based, science-based, and really looking at the rising changes that we need to be able to address.
Absolutely.
And I would just say, sorry, my closing comment on that is one of the things that we've enabled is something called the Business Commission to Tackle Inequality. And we've just launched this. We've got a variety of different commissioners on this, and it is designed specifically to get after these tough questions, some of which, of course, link back to climate and the climate challenge and investment into that, like the just rural transition, but equally start to get after some of the things we don't like to talk about so much, like the role of tax and the role of salary and the role of service provision. So there's a lot of pieces to that question. We're looking at what it means from a climate perspective. We at least have a bit of an advanced movement because we know where some of those opportunities are.
Well, I think that's great. And if we could all, I guess at the end of that panel, just like commit to actually working together to identifying the right type of KPIs and to making sure that as we focus on green issue and the transition and you know, in a way, capturing CO2 emissions and like counting them is easy. When you look at nature, it becomes way more complicated. When you add the social aspect to it, then it becomes almost like overwhelming. So how do we take that into account? I know that this is something that should be at the heart of everything we do. Otherwise, we'll just get a huge pushback on all the solutions that we've been working on. So is Magali, I'm sure you've been addressing that, Bertrand, at the Solar Impulse Foundation, how do you take that into account? Antoine, is it part of your investment decision? Where are the people at the end of the day? You know, there's the one who are affected by the innovations and the negative impact of climate change. And then we're going to have to close because I think I'm being too long.
The people are and have to be at the middle of the energy transition and the climate transition. Otherwise, it will never happen. But we really have to understand that although we will lose a couple of professions, we will gain much more jobs. So some professions will disappear and new professions will come and more jobs will be created. Basically, what do we have to do? We have to replace all the infrastructures of the world in terms of energy, in terms of retrofitting the buildings, in terms of industrial process, in terms of mobility, in terms of sources of energy. This is what we need to do. So if it is expensive, it will ruin the world and nobody will do it. If it is profitable, it's the biggest opportunity of the century in terms of industry, market, and funding. So we can prove that it is profitable. So that's a good point. If it is profitable, the finance will come. And if the finance comes, of course it will happen. And to happen, we need people. We need a lot of people to do it. And there was just one number I heard that is really striking. If you want to produce 1 megawatt hour of coal, of electricity by coal, you need 1 job. If you want the same megawatt hour by solar energy, you need 7 people.
We just need to make sure these jobs are equally placed in the world and not only in like developing countries or emerging countries.
Absolutely.
That's an issue. Sorry, Bertrand, didn't mean to interrupt.
Yeah, so no problem for jobs. You know, there are professions that are going to disappear because the regulation does it. Like cocaine. Cocaine makes a lot of GDP in some countries, but it is illegal And the UN programs are pushing a requalification of the agriculture of the drugs into legal activities. It's going to be exactly the same in terms of fossil energy that are poisoning the world as drugs, and that will be needing a requalification in new professions. So it has happened and it will happen, and this, I believe, is just a fact. It's not going to be losing jobs, we're going to gain jobs.
It's about how to make the transition happen, how you fund that. Anyway, so please, Magali, Antoine, and then maybe if you want to have add something at the end, Diane. I'm going to have to push you because we're a bit late, and that's my fault.
You know, I wanted to talk about people because people is completely, we talk about building for the people and the planet. And you need concrete. You need concrete to develop all the infrastructure for the urbanization. You need concrete to give houses to people. So, and frankly, decarbonizing concrete doesn't mean that the process will be simpler, needing less people. So we don't have that problem, which is why I will talk for 2 seconds about how, at the contrary, technology can solve societal problems. And I will mention something we did in Malawi, where we built in 18 hours, 3D printed a school. There is 36,000 classes missing in Malawi. It's a gap that would take decades to cover. We can do it with 3D printing. Now, is it and 70% less CO2? We have created jobs because they are different jobs. We have to make the ink locally. We have to do all of that. But also, you have to think of how do you bridge those gaps. All the hundreds of millions of people who don't have access to electricity, etc., etc. So it's also the other side of the coin is how, it's not just how many people we employ, it's also how we help society to tackle all the challenges they already have today and that will go worse and worse.
So first of all, people ask us very often, why don't you go faster to pull out, for example, of fossil industry? Why do you give them the time to transition? It would be so simple to just pull out and unplug. But no, the main reason why we are not, because, as a bank, we cannot finance everything. So we could fill all our balance sheet with organic food and with a lot of producers. So it's not the reason why we are not unplugging faster is exactly what you say, is because at one moment we have to be careful and let the people the time to adapt, but the adaptation has to be done swiftly. So it's there is a tension between both, and we are accelerating, we are putting the pressure, but we never forget that at the end of the day, if the rope is broken, people will be broken, and we have to be very careful to this. But we have to go fast, and going fast will create problems. And here, it's about being a bank. You do not deserve the name of bank if you are not able to take care of local ecosystem. Banking is, of course, some of organizations are global, but at the end of the day, it's a local work. And as a bank, we are working on local ecosystems to help local startups, to help local social business, to help local schools for energy transition, to upskill people. So we really believe that